everyone, welcome back to the Reclaimed Ranch. It's that time again for Sonnets Maker's box. So for this box, we have a celebration of all things garden, and I am in love with these papers, you guys. Royce from Recycled Treasures and Connie from The Painted Photographer did an amazing job with their papers this month, as they do every month. But the Sweet Pickins color this month is Haberdash, a nice neutral. And then for Fusion, we have Raw Silk. And one of my favorite Fusion colors is Homestead Blue. Love that color. And then for the DIY paint, we have Beadboard and the color Eden, which is a beautiful green color. Love it. So let's get a better picture of these gorgeous floral papers. So this is that napkin that Sonnet sent, and it is beautiful. And she always tries to find something to coordinate with the paints as well that she sends. So it makes it real easy to make a small vignette. Look at this paper Connie made. So this is called the Artist Garden. Love that the paintbrush has some florals. And this beautiful one is called Queen Anne. Love, love, love that one. And then Royce did a couple that are fairly similar to each other, but they complement each other very well. This first one here is called Field and Feather. And it has some florals, some butterflies, some birds, a little bit of everything that you would see in a garden. And then the second one is called Botanical Curiosity. So it has some of those same images, but they're kind of blown up a little bit more, and it has more of that typography type ephemera in the background, which I absolutely love with Royce's papers. So these are just absolutely gorgeous, and I can't wait to get started. So the first project we're going to start is going to be this brass antique frame that I had, and I painted it, I believe, just with a chalk paint white, and then distressed it back, and then I just let it sit there because I did not know what to put in there. But the minute I saw Connie's paper this month, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I had this super thick cardboard. I think this is kind of like the backing that they use for some of these picture frames back in the day. And so I just kind of traced it out and used my X-Acto knife to cut through that board, and then I just used some scissors to kind of clean up the edges because obviously it's hard to get, the perfect fit the first time around. So you just fiddle with it until it can go in there. And then what I did was I just decoupaged that paper of Connie's onto this board, and then I used my hot glue to seal it into place, and basically that one is done. I love it when I don't have to do a ton to make a gorgeous DIY project for either my booth in the store or my own home decor. Makes it so nice. All right, so the second project, I think I got these at a yard sale, but it was in several pieces. It was broken. It's an old rusty crusty little watering can. And so I am just going to go ahead and solder these joints back together. I knew I could fix it, so I think I got it for like 25 cents, really cheap. And I learned how to solder when I was actually working in the orthodontics world for 18 years. I actually used to work on patients as well as do all the lab work. So I custom made different appliances for the kids and adults. So that's where I got my skills. But soldering actually is really easy to do. And you can get these kits off of Amazon for pretty cheap. So I'm just putting some spot solders into place, and then I will go back and solder the entire thing. And obviously it's real easy to tell that I soldered it, so I'm going to go ahead in with my Fusion Matte Tough Coat, and I'm going to give it one good coat to seal that rust in and let that dry. Once that's dry, we're going to go back in and take a little bit of paint and kind of customize the colors to make it look more rusty and dirty around the soldering joints so that it all blends in really well. I'm going to use the little paintbrush, the Artist Garden that Connie did. And what I did was I did the water technique to rip it out, and now I'm going to flip it over and paint the back white so that I don't have to paint the watering can. And that way I know my image is going to be perfect where it is at. So I just put one coat of white, dry it really well, and then we're going to use Fusion's decoupage gel to decoupage one on each side. And since they're so small, you can just decoupage right quickly. You don't have to use a misting bottle or anything. I just use the gel. And then once those are on, this project is basically done. So you have to let me know what you guys think. I think it turned out super cute. Actually, what I did do is, because those edges were kind of bright to see, I did take a little bit of DIY's Dark and Decrepit and blended those edges into the watering can a little bit so it wasn't as noticeable, and I think it turned out really well. All right, so this next project, I am going to be using just one of those popcorn tins that you can find at any thrift store for about $1. I found one of the florals on the rice paper Botanical Curiosity, and I'm going to cut that out because it's going to go on top of the lid. And so what I did was I cut it out a little bit bigger than the actual lid size. That way I can use my little hand sander to remove the excess. So you always want to have a white base to make those colors pop when you're decoupaging. So I did put 2 coats of Picket Fence from Fusion on there. And then now I'm going to use the Homestead Blue from Fusion on the base. I just love this color. And those florals in recycled paper, Sonnet is really good about picking colors that match, and this just goes perfect with some of those florals in there. So I did do 2 coats of the Fusion around the base of this tin and let that dry really well. And then I went in, if I had like Golden Ticket or something, I would have used that, but I used Poshmark to make gold color, and so you'll see that in just a minute. So I'm always going to go in with my decoupage gel, place that on there real quick, let it dry. Always place a sealing top coat with the decoupage gel. And then that needs to dry really well, otherwise this part, the paper will rip and tear. And I know that by actually doing it. So beware of that. Make sure it's super dry before you go in and try and remove any of the excess. So this was that Posh Chalk pigment infuser, and then I'm using Lemon Gold. It's beautiful, beautiful color. Love it. And so I thought it would be really, really pretty to add some gold into the tin around that where the floral is on top, just the edge there of the lid. I'm going to go ahead and paint gold, and I did put a little bit of gold into the blue florals on the lid there, and then I painted just the tiny little rim around the base of the tin gold as well to kind of tie it all in. And I just think this is so pretty. Now when you use this type of gold were you using, the Posh Chalk, it does take quite a few coats to get really good coverage, especially over white. The darker the color, like if I would have had like a dark, maybe an orange or like a rust red or something, that gold would be easier to cover. But since it was white, I just went ahead and did, I think it was 4 coats, and finally got the gold that I wanted. And here I am going around the lower end there, just a tiny little hint of gold around the end, and then I'm going to call this good. I was going to try, I actually did try to put gold florals, stamped gold florals on there, but they just weren't turning out. So I just figured I'll put the floor or the gold on the end and call it good. Now this last piece is a gorgeous vintage little corner shelf nightstand, and this is actually my Aunt Maria's. And when I was over visiting, I saw this in her guest bedroom, and I just fell in love with this. And so I asked if I can bring it home and give it a little makeover, and she's like, of course. So can't do anything without my supervisors, as you see, wandering around there. So these brass handles were actually nailed on with 4 tiny little nails each. And so I was kind of surprised by that. Nothing was screwed on the inside. And this piece was, there's a stamp on the side that says it was made in Romania. So it's very well built, and has, you know, it's, the only problem was on that top part, and the veneer top part was a little bit cracked, and so I just filled it in with some Bondo, sanded it down smooth, and then I was going to paint it anyway. So as always, after getting the hardware off, you want to really clean your furniture pieces. I use TSP. It's a great degreaser. Charlie thinks so as well. And it just removes that dirt, no problem. And so after I wipe it down really good, that's when I went in and just did a scuff sand with a 220 grit paper, and I sanded down that white spot on top and put the Bondo in just one little area, got it all smooth. Now I'm going to go in with that color from DIY Eden, that green, gorgeous green. I'm going to paint the sides, these little corbel sides, and then the top green and the base, and then we're going to decoupage that really pretty Field and Feather paper from Recycle Treasures. So once the green sets, I did 2 coats and I let them dry. I did go in with Fusion's Tough Coat Matte, and I sealed it. You always want to seal any clay-based paint or chalk paint, otherwise water will reactivate it and it'll smear everywhere. So I wanted to use the Sweet Pickins milk paint on this, the Haberdash, and have that green pop through the cracks and little chips and stuff. And so you want to make sure to seal it really well so that once you put that milk paint on, it's not going to have a problem doing that. And I love this piece. I've never seen a little corner piece so cute. And I did have a little bit of problems decoupaging those drawers because they curve different ways, but they all curve somehow. And so decoupaging on a curved surface is a little bit more harder to do than a flat surface. So if you've never messed with milk paint, it's like my favorite paint of all time because it's so unpredictable and I love that about it. So it's a dry paint and it's two parts. You just do 1 part paint to 1 part water. I use a little bit more warm water so that it mixes a lot easier. And you mix it really well. I usually use a little popsicle stick to mix. You can use an emulsion blender. You can use pretty much anything. You just want to mix it for a good couple minutes and then you want to let it sit for about 10 minutes and that's going to thicken up. And so again, I'm using a lighter color over a darker surface, so it's going to take more coats. Just kind of beware of that. So the first coat looks terrible, and that's okay. That's kind of what it's supposed to do. The main thing with milk paint is it's a lot more thin consistency than regular paint, so you have to really watch your drips. Make sure that it, isn't dripping anywhere because you don't want to have to sand those off later. It's a lot harder to do that. So I'm just going to put on 1 coat, let it dry really well in between. And if you put heat to your coats of milk paint, they will force it to crack and chip. So I don't believe I did it on the first go around. I just let it naturally dry. And then the second coat and the third coat, I did add just a little bit of heat and it cracked really well. It got really chippy. Um, but that's okay. That's what I was looking for. I wanted that green to pop through. So if you don't want the chippy crackle effect, what you can use is you can add an Ultra Bond. I believe Sweet Pickins makes an Ultra Bond. Um, Fusion has one too. But you can use that to thicken up the paint a little bit and it'll adhere a lot more so that it has less chance of cracking. So when it does do this, I always want to do a coat of sanding in between each coat. And look at that chippy goodness, you guys. I love it. And I love these colors together. They're so pretty. So what I did was sanded the whole piece down and now we are going to do the decoupage part. And Charlie, of course, has to approve. He said, "Yep, this paper will work, Mom. Looks good." So I went ahead and I'm using my decoupage gel. I started from the top and just did 1 drawer at a time. Now I'm doing the entire paper on all at once. And then I'm going to let it dry very thoroughly. And then I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and cut the drawers out. People tend to do it different ways. Some people like to cut each strip for the drawers and do it separately, but to me it just seems more time efficient to do it all at once, let it dry, and then cut them out. And then after they're cut out, I went ahead and just used my little finger sander to remove the excess and made sure to reseal all the places that lifted up a little bit. And then it was time for the hardware to go back on. So that was actually the hardest part of this whole thing, was trying to find the holes, those little tiny nail holes for the hardware, because I couldn't use the back side of the drawer because there was no holes all the way through. So I had to kind of look in the light and kind of feel around with my fingers, and then I took my measuring tape out and kind of figured where they would be and then found the holes through there. So it took a little while, but I got it done, and I didn't want to change out that hardware because I loved it so much. So this is me trying to figure out, okay, ooh, I found one. Okay, that's got to go there. So then once you find one, it wasn't that bad. It was just finding the first one. So after that, I just went ahead and nailed them all on. And then I used Fusion Clear Wax. I waxed the entire piece. And whenever you have a piece that has wooden drawers, especially something like this with the tracks, you always want to wax the tracks and the guide that it goes on, because it just makes those drawers slide really smooth and makes it a lot easier. They kind of tend to dry out and catch every now and then. And I noticed that when I was tearing this apart, the lower drawer had a hard time coming off and out. So putting that wax on there made it slide a lot more easy. So if you're not familiar with Sonnet's Maker's Box, it's Sonnet from Sonnet's Garden Blooms. She has a subscription every month where she sends out 2 exclusive recycled papers, 2 exclusive Connie rice papers, and then you get 2 fusion paints, 2 DIY paints, and a Sweet Pickins milk paint to craft with. and it's an absolutely phenomenal deal. Um, I love it because it's just like Christmas every month for me when this arrives on my doorstep. And a lot of times there'll be colors that I've never even used or never thought to use because, I'm more of a neutral person. And so this kind of gets me out of my little box and gets me more creative. And I really love getting that box every month. It's just a joy to have. It's just a little something for me that I do myself. So, for myself, I should say. But here they all are. I just love this box. This was just spot on for garden, and these projects turned out so gorgeous, I think. And so I'll be putting a couple of these onto my website. Of course, my aunt will get her little dresser drawer back nightstand, and I hope she loves it just as much as I do. So you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week for more fun flips. Bye.